Um, I'm sort of the odd man out here because the only experience I have here is as a teacher, not as a teacher of teachers. And frankly, I've given very little thought to teaching on a meta level. So the idea of teaching teachers to teach sort of, seems a little hard for me to get my head around. This is a paper that I developed some years ago when I was teaching engineering students. After years of doing environmental philosophy and ethics to undergraduates, I was at New Jersey Institute of Technology teaching engineers for the first time. And as a result of that, my understanding of environmental ethics and philosophy expanded because I suddenly realized that it was engineers who really made the world. I mean, it's that simple. And they get the blame and hardly any of the credit when it comes to the screw-ups all the way from BP to the Challenger shuttle explosion to Bhopal to Chernobyl. I became kind of an expert in disasters. People avoid talking to me in the hall sometimes. Oh, here comes Mr. Disaster, Professor Disaster. So as a result of this, I started to think about some sort of simple moral thought experiments, if you will. And I was influenced a lot by Kohlberg's, Heinz's dilemma. And you all know that he used this model and came up with, like, what do you do if, your wife is dying and there's only one pharmacy that has the medicine? But I didn't quite see how that was going to be applicable to the environment. My other problem was our entire ethical theory from Aristotle to the present is what philosophers of the environment would call anthropocentric. It's focused around human beings as being the only entity of value. Animals are out, of course. In fact, most philosophers put animals, historically at least, in almost a sub-life category, sort of like mechanisms or machines of some sort. Needless to say, the non-living has no moral standing at all. And so our entire Western tradition, both philosophically and religiously, the human soul, either because it's immortal or because it's rational, is the privileged entity. Now, it occurred to me that what that's really all about is what I call my first test, the mother test. Now, engineers spend a lot of time worrying about risk. And is this product safe enough to put out in the world? So in order to sort of simplify that, I just simply call it the mother test. And the question is very simple. Is this artifact that we're about to release into the world, this bridge, this elevator, this car, is it safe? Yeah? Is it safe enough for someone that we deeply care about? Now I picked the mother because, for obvious reasons, the mother is the one person who we are most indebted to, to whom we owe our very existence, and then both literally, biologically, and then subsequently through nurturing, even if it's not the literal mother, it's a mother. And so we're all born, and we all die, and those are ineluctable facts of the human condition. The mother is an anthropocentric model. And whether you're Kantian or Aristotle or Mill, doesn't matter. The essential question is protecting civilization. The second test I got from someone who you may not be familiar with, named Aldo Leopold, who wrote a book called the San Conti Almanac. And that book is sort of considered the Bible of the environmental movement in the United States and in the world. And he wrote a little piece in there, short little pieces, called Learning to Think Like a Mountain, or Thinking Like a Mountain. And basically the idea is that as a young man, he liked to go hunting and liked to shoot deer. And he figured the less wolves, the more deer. And it's a story about he and his buddies one day shooting at what they thought was a deer, but turned out to be a wolf. And not only was it a wolf, but she had a lot of cubs. And as they came down the rim rock down to the river, he says that he saw a green fire dying in her eyes, and that neither the wolf nor the mountain would agree that the more deer, the less wolves, the more deer. What he ends up saying is that to the mountain, the wolfless mountain is more dangerous than anything because there are too many deers, and too many deers destroy the mountainside, and they'll eat all the way a foot underground to get the roots and all the way up to the leaves at the top, and they'll pull a whole mountainside down. Whereas a deer can be replaced in a matter of years. And so you need the wolves and the deer. And if you shoot all the wolves, we've inherited their job, in effect, is what he ends up saying. So learning to think like a mountain moves us from the anthropocentric to a biocentric perspective. And so I was somewhat caricatured by some of my students in the student paper where they publish it once a year. They do a comedy routine. And in this comedy routine, when I was mentioned, they said, oh yes, and he wants us to learn to think like a mountain, ha ha ha. We engineers, how are we ever going to learn to think like a mountain? Well, by the end of the semester, they understood, of course, what I was talking about. The real point is that the mountain has something we don't. Namely, it has time. It looks at things from this much, much broader perspective than we had. So learning to think like a mountain means facing up to the facts of limitation and finitude. That human beings are simply one member of the biotic community, not its lords and masters. For most of their history, human beings have been forced to struggle against nature, to wrest food and shelter from the raw material of nature into which we have been so pitilessly cast. During the last several centuries, with the sudden advent of modern science and technology, that seemingly unalterable fact of the human condition has utterly changed. We have turned the tables. We have wrested from nature its secrets and turned them to our advantage. Now it is nature that lies at our mercy, and we who hold its fate in our hands. Our will, intellect, our greed, ingenuity, ambition, and hubris have finally gotten the upper hand over Mother Nature, and we've engaged in an orgy of plunder and exploitation beyond even the wildest dreams of previous visionaries and utopians. The earth now lies before us as a storehouse from which we may presumably take what we will, as fast as we wish, and seemingly without limit. Our numbers have reached beyond counting, and our use of Earth's household has grown beyond all awareness of limits. So the move to the mountain isn't just a notion of a broader horizon, sort of a mountaintop experience, but it's also the beginning of the realization that man is just one creature in what Leopold calls the land pyramid. Now, just to sort of keep the notion of a threesome, I decided it really needed a third, not just the mother and the mountain, but what I call the mature self, or the mature ecological or environmental self. And in part I owe this to Arne Næss, the Norwegian philosopher who coined the phrase deep ecology, and whose notion of self-realization is very crucial. Also Kohlberg, coming out of Piaget and Erikson, and the whole notion of moral development. And so my idea is that we go from the anthropocentric to a kind of biocentric, and then eventually to an ecocentric position. The mature self, a thought experiment, has sort of two dimensions to it. The first one is we project ourselves into the future, and then look back upon the present ethical question, and from there, namely this more mature vantage point, we ask ourselves, how might this decision look to us in 10 years from now? So, in a way, before we engage in any significant action on the environment, we should ask ourselves, what's the likely impact of this going to be, say, 10 years down the road, or even further? A second version of the mature self-test is to reflect as deeply on our decisions as we can, deeper than mere calculating reason can take us, and to ask, what does our moral conscience really tell us? There's no doubt in my mind but that the people at BP knew damn well what they were doing and the risk they were running, and once it started, they knew what they had done. And yet they kept lying to each other and to us for a long, long time, including our own government, which was very belatedly truthful about the realities of what was happening there. In practice, I think, the mature self ends up advocating a position that I called an ombudsman for the earth. It seems to me that we need to have advocates, people who will step in and speak for those who cannot speak, whether they're pets or children. Now, in practice, what this means is what I call an expanded stakeholder analysis. Our current stakeholder analysis is limited to the current people who have an immediate stake in the outcome of a decision. And that doesn't mean anybody who's dead or anybody who isn't alive yet. It just means the interest groups right here and now who can speak for themselves. The need for the expanded stakeholder analysis is that, for one thing, future generations aren't here, and yet they have a stake. Somebody has to be at the table that says, I don't just represent us here now today, I have to speak for the second, the third, fourth generation down the road. We have to have air and water, blah, 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 yada, yada, for them too. Another part of the stakeholder analysis, following Leopold, would be the non-living, non-human part of the environment. The water, the air, the land, the soil, the oceans. From Leopold's point of view in the land pyramid, all of those layers are constituents in the land pyramid and have a claim to be represented in the expanded stakeholder analysis. The word ombudsman is confusing. Maybe stewardship might be better. It's a more classical biblical term. But it's a global stewardship now. It's not the stewardship of your backyard or your farm or your manor house. We have willy-nilly inherited the global responsibility for global stewardship. Whether or not these thought experiments are going to work on any given individual, or who can tell. However, I have found through practice, through experience of sharing this paper with my students, either handing it out as part of the curriculum or reading parts of it or so on, that they've been very effective. The greatest challenge facing the mature ecological self is the requirement of balancing the demands of the mother, that is civilization, on the one hand, and the demands of the mountain, namely the natural environment, on the other. We cannot keep the mother without the mountain. We need nature to survive. And without the mother, the mountain will become impoverished as well. Without humans, nature would lose the unique perception of its glory. The smiles of the birds, the grandeur of the mountains, the songs of the brook need human eyes and ears, attuned to their beauty as much as we need air, earth, fire, and water to survive. A friend of mine, after he heard this lecture, summarized it shorthand by saying, oh, in other words, we should love our mother, climb mountains, and grow up. So that's how I went.